One more video about curves and how to use them to create Nurbs, or non-uniform rational B-splines, which is a heck of a mouthful. No wonder they decided to shorten that to Nurbs, N-U-R-B-S. Now, Nurbs, I create one as an example, Nurbs primitives sphere. This is a Nurbs object as opposed to a polygon object. The components of a polygon object are vertices, edges, and faces. Nurbs, you got isoparms, control vertices, hulls, surface patch, like this thing right here. Isoparms are these pieces here. Control vertices are similar to the ones you saw in curves. And the reason why Nurbs have control vertices like the curves do is because a Nurbs object is basically what happens if you take a curve and turn it into a three-dimensional shape. All of these isoparms right here are basically just curves with a surface between them. Here's a curve here, here's a curve here, here's a curve here, here's a curve there, and then the Nurbs is everything in between it. I can adjust that to form the surface. If I go to the hull, I get this almost polygonal type shape that connects each of the control vertices together, and I can adjust those to adjust a bunch of the control vertices at once. All the control vertices on a single curve, basically. I can adjust them all simultaneously. Give the ones up and down, like those ones. So rather than using a pre-existing Nurbs object, let's see how to create one out of curves. So if I first create a circle, here's a curve in the shape of a circle. That's a little bit boring, so I'm going to grab my control vertices, add a bit of shape to this, make it a bit spiky, just for the fun. Duplicate this, move it up, two curves. I grab both of them, go to Surfaces, Loft, and now I've got a Nurbs object made out of those two curves. If I were to grab one of the curves I made with and adjust it, it'll automatically move my Nurbs object to match it, but that's still kind of boring with just the two of them. Let's see what happens if I make multiple curves here based on the same one, like that. You can imagine a new surface that flows from one curve to the next, the next, the next. Now, to actually create that surface, I have to select these in order. If I select these in the wrong order, like that, it's going to go connecting them in the order that I have them selected. If I were to loft this, I get some weird mushroom shape or possibly a lamp. Delete that. So instead, I'm going to make sure I do this in order. So from first one to the second one, the third, fourth, and the fifth. Surface loft, and it follows that shape like that. Now, you may notice it does not necessarily connect it in a straight line anymore. The first one, it went from one to the next, but here it's trying to connect these in a smooth shape. And the way it does that is not always predictable, in my experience. Not only that, but it has created a weird shape up here, where it's no longer even the same outline as the rest of this. May change if I move this around. Yeah, you can see how that interpolates between them in different ways depending on how far apart they are, and it gets some really bizarre results sometimes. Fortunately, something like that can be fixed if I go back to my surface right here, find my control vertices. Oh boy, what are you doing way up here? There's four. You can see this is where the rest of them are. Use me to snap that down. Now scale these in. They bring it back to the shape that it was before it decided to make its own ideas what it should look like. And you can see even down here, this does not necessarily correspond to the curve I've got in this. This is why I'm always kind of uncomfortable using Nurbs for a lot of things. I don't always know what it's going to do. Or control vertex. What are you? You're not even from this part. There we go. Actually, I'm not even sure how many of these are from which part. This might be from this one. No, that is from that one. Yeah, look at that. See how unpredictable it gets. I'm going to say that a lot. I never know what this thing is going to do until it does it. But fortunately, you can adjust it. Oh dear. I wonder, it looks so weird. These are scaled inside out. Whatever. This is just supposed to be an example. But depending on what you're doing, you can get really complicated shapes out of this. And if you decide, well, I don't want this to have this indent and bulge right here, I want this to have a flatter top, what you can do is you can add new isoparms into this to adjust the shape. Now, if I were to right-click, go to isoparm, you can see I can sort of kind of click on it, but then drag it out, and I get this new red line right here that turns into a yellow dotted line after I let go. And this is a theoretical isoparm. Any curve that can fit onto the surface of this object is a potential isoparm. If I want to make this a permanent and real isoparm, I have to go to Surfaces and Insert Isoparm. Now I've got a real one right here. And this means I can now go to my hull and try to find that one. Is it this right here? Yeah, I think so. I can find all three of these hulls. One of them is inside, I'm pretty sure. Yep. And flatten those out. I can start creating a flatter top to this surface right here. If I have one even closer to this edge right there, well, this isoparm, I can force a sharper corner right there. Surfaces, insert isoparm, back to hull again. There it is. Lift that up so it's about the same height as the others. And now I've got kind of a corner right here. So that's how you can manipulate your nerve shape after you've made it. If you need to make it more like an idea that you had in your head that this wasn't quite working for. One more right here. Surfaces, insert isoparm. If I didn't want this to have a bulge out like that, I could sort of scale it in. Adjust a little bit to get the results I want. Enough of this. I'm going to delete these. The other tool I want to show for surfaces after loft is the revolve tool, which is useful if I'm creating something like, say, a wine bottle or even a wine glass. And so I'm going to start by going to my front view. That roughly here. Create curve tools, EP curve tool. I'm going to create an outline of a wine glass with a curve. So I'm going to start beginning, out to the edge, back again, up, up, out. And yes, this is going to look terrible. It always does. I can never draw a curve that looks exactly what I want first try. It's okay, I've got my control vertices and start adjusting this. Not always easy to figure out where these control vertices are relative to the curve I wind up with. Want to make sure one thing though. I want to be sure that these beginning and edge control vertices are snapped to the center line right here. If they go through or too short, it's going to either leave a hole over here or it's going to go through the other side like that. So I'm going to hold down X, snap that to the center line. X, I might as well snap this both directions, so it's here and here, and snap this center into that bottom of it. Same thing with you. If I want a sharper edge, I can pull this out like that, get these really close together. The closer they are, the sharper the corner will be. If I decide that I'm not getting enough control over the shape, that's easily fixed as well. All I have to do is right-click, curve point. I can imagine a couple more points along the curve. And just like the isoparms, these are theoretical points. They're not really there yet. I have to go to curves and tell it to insert a knot. And with that, I now have new control vertices to work with. Make the glass a little bit thinner right here. Maybe make the stem a little taller, base a little shorter. I can adjust this at any point. Now I go back to my perspective view. You can see I've got something that's roughly wine goblet shaped. Taller. I can adjust it later too. So I'll grab this, surfaces, and revolve. I want to point out one important thing about this. It revolves by default in the y-axis, which is up and down, and the y-axis in the center of the scene. If I were to move this out here somewhere, it's still going to revolve it around the center of the scene, so there's going to be a huge gap in there. You have to make these from the middle right here. Always got to make them from the center, and you can move them out afterwards. I can also adjust the control vertices on the curve to adjust the end results of the revolved Nurbs surface however I want. And that will follow all the way around the revolved surface. I can also go to my inputs, revolve 1 right there. And it's got like start sweep, so I can tell it where I want to start the revolution from, end sweep, so I can make it not go all the way around. Sections allows me to add more edges into it if I want. 8's usually good enough. Now, the thing to keep in mind about Nurbs objects, beyond the fact that I find them personally harder to work with than polygons generally, is that even though they look really nice right now, at render time, Maya doesn't really know how to render a Nurbs object. It does a temporary conversion into polygons, which means that I might as well, if I want to make sure I get the results that I want, specifically convert this Nurbs object into a polygon object. And that's actually very easy to do. I just go to Modify, Convert, Nurbs to Polygons, option box. And to show you what this looks like by default, I'm just going to tell us to reset settings. This is the default settings. You notice by default is set to triangles. I find triangles just as hard to work with as Nurbs, really. So I'm going to turn that to quads, which are much cleaner in my opinion. I'm going to change the tessellation method to general. And I will point out that everything I'm doing right now is according to my personal preferences. When I was first taught to do this, he used standard fit and fiddled with it from there. I found standard fit to be awkward and not quite what I wanted, so I experimented and I looked through the different settings until I got what worked for me. Don't just take my word for it. Look through these settings, play around with them, see what works for you best. I like general, and I also like changing my U and V type right here to per span of isoparms. Per span of isoparms. This allows you to control how many edge loops are going to be between each of these isoparms. The span is the gap between these. So when this is converted into polygons, there's going to be 3 edge loops between each of these. I can adjust this now, or I can wait until after I've done it and adjust it later. I like to adjust it afterwards, so I hit tessellate. A little bit hard to see with the other object in the way, so I can just pull that out of it like that. And now if I go to my inputs, there's my Nurbs tessellate 1 right there. U number, V number. I increase that, I can get more or less edge loops between the spans in the U direction or the V direction. I can control how smooth it is. All right. Also, whenever I'm finished with these, I always like to delete history because if I don't, if I go back here and I'm making the adjustments to the curve, you notice it changes the surface, which then changes the polygon. So I grab this, edit, delete by type history, and now that will affect this, but not this. All right, that is all the stuff I can think of that I want to talk about using curves for modeling.